Where do I go? Where will I be? It's who I am. What will they see? Maybe I pray. Yeah. At the end of my days. Yeah. What will they say? What will they say?
All right, there we go. And what do you mean by that?
Well, you're not always focused on yourself. You have an awareness that there's others. You know, because a lot of people are so inwardly self-focused that they're not as what is it? You have to be self-aware, right? But I think you can be too self-aware.
Do you think being at least self-awareness, do you think that's something that just comes innately? Like, do you think you either have that quality or you don't?
I think some of that's true, but I think that you can, like anything, we're habitual creatures. You know, we tend to form habits, and I think bad habits can be broken. Good habits can be developed. And so I think self-awareness, some people may be more inclined to be self-aware, but then I think there's times when you can say, you know, you discipline yourself to be what I call others oriented, that you're just looking, hey, this isn't all about me. You know, so I that's just how I look at that. Is still a person can be so others oriented that maybe they're not very focused on maybe some things they should be looking at. You know, I think about the in Matthew chapter 7, you know, Jesus talks about remove the plank from your eye before you try to remove the splinter. He calls you a hypocrite first. You know, you hypocrite. You're and he talks about taking the before you try to remove the little speck or splinter in the other's eye, to remove the plank. And one time, and I've ebbed and flowed on this, but a lot of times in my quiet time, sometimes I'll just get on a scripture and camp on it, and I may share a couple of those.
Absolutely.
And maybe this one, because I think it would be good, and then I'll stop and you can get us started or whatever you want to do. But
we're going.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay.
You're good.
Okay. So, you know, Jesus does say, hey, before you try to remove this speck out or out of your brother or sister's eye, to remove the plank. And so one time in my quiet time, I was sitting there, I was going, well, Lord, what is the plank? And he said, you are. And I said, I'm the plank. He goes, yeah. Until you remove your prejudices and your bias and how you've been raised and all these prejudices that you've got in your life, until you can remove those from the situation, you're going to have a hard time seeing this person the way I see him. And so it really hit me in that I was in the way, and until I could remove my thoughts and feelings and try to look at a person the way God sees them, that I could then remove I could come alongside in love and kindness and compassion and be able to say, hey, do you realize you have this little speck in your eye, which may not be that big a deal, but it could be a big deal for a person.
Yeah. I think the funniest thing I think about that when I hear that scripture is when you read about the hypocrites, and is he referring to the Pharisees in Matthew 7 there? And it's so easy for me to be like, and see that log in others' eyes, see that the hypocrisy in other people's lives, but really he's talking about me. But it's so easy. The instinctual thing is to say, yeah, those Pharisees, like, they're so blind to everything. But then you realize, like, I probably am pretty close to a Pharisee though too. Like, he's also talking about me, you know?
Yes.
And I guess that kind of drives back to your initial point about self-awareness. It's just a heck of a lot easier. And I don't know why this is. It's a heck of a lot easier to see problems in other people than the problems we have in ourselves.
Correct.
I don't know why that is though.
Yeah.
We're like the hero of our own story, you know?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I think it's worth noting. Tell the story about the buffalo again, because I did not know this, and I love fun facts.
Okay. So, when I was in C12 group, we developed this buffalo culture. And the reason why they moved towards kind of a buffalo culture mindset was because the unique thing about the buffaloes, when all these storms come over the Rocky Mountains and hit the plains of Colorado and Oklahoma and all this, that the buffalo's the one animal that instead of running away from a storm when it comes, they actually turn and run into the storm. And by doing that, they get it over with. They deal with it. And so that buffalo mindset says, look, I can put this off. I can procrastinate. I could do a lot of things to avoid maybe conflict or something that needs to be addressed. And, you know, Jesus said, just present the truth in love. So we can give hard truth or we can be really loving. But when we can combine truth and love, then I think we can be heard, right? When you combine those two. And I think being the buffalo is not stomping and stampeding over people, but it is saying, hey, I'm not going to avoid what's obvious and that needs to be addressed or needs to be dealt with or needs to be handled.
Yeah. It's gosh, that's so interesting. I just think there's so much there to think about too, because they also are very calm demeanored. They're huge, they're gigantic, and they're loaded down with muscle, but they also are very calm. And so it's not like they're running. You don't run into your issues out of control and I'm guilty of this, like emotionally fly off the handle trying to solve problems, but they just calmly probably walk or gallop into the storm.
Yes.
And I wish I could handle issues like that in my life, you know? So anyways, I will say this though, and I do think I apologize for not giving more of a formal introduction, because I do like just the casual telling of stories and just casual conversation, but I've heard a ton about you, and I am thankful that you came in to sit down. And so if you wouldn't mind, start kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and we'll kind of just go from there. Because there is no script, but I've just heard you were a great person to talk to and a heck of a stories you got. And so I did want to say that.
Well, 63, almost 64, there are a lot of stories. You know, the older you get, the more stories
Sure.
you have. You know, I'm from Roanoke Rapids originally, right near the Virginia line in North Carolina on I-95, and grew up in a great family. You know, I don't know who all will hear this. I had an older sister that when she was 13, she was 2 years older than me, that got, you know, there's an old expression, she got caught up in the wrong crowd. But she became part of that crowd. And her name's Kim. She's great now. But she got in a lot of trouble. She actually spent some time at Women's State Penitentiary.
Did you say she was 13?
13 when she started getting in trouble.
Oh, okay.
And in her 20s, ended up spending time, got involved in drugs, alcohol, all kinds of really tough things. And I don't know why I got on that just to begin with, but what I'll say is, I think what I learned from that is I watched her and I saw the stress that it caused on my mom and dad. And I realized that I knew what not to do. I saw what she did and I said, gosh, if that's what's going to happen to me if I choose to do those things, I'm staying away from that. So certainly doesn't make me a saint in any way, well, other than what Christ has said about me.
Right.
But I mean,
right.
The fact that you know, do I thank God that happened to her? No. Did I learn from that experience and watching her as I grew up? I think it influenced my life a lot, just watching how she chose to make decisions and live her life. And I love her deeply. And, you know, she's AA and NA. I mean, she's that. And I'm thankful she's healthy now,
right.
You know, so that's good. But, you know, I had a dad that was great. He's a work hard, play hard guy, you know, and grew up on Lake Gaston, swimming and boating and skiing and doing all those things on the weekends. So it was great. And he was an entrepreneur. He and another man bought into I would call it a failing petroleum distributorship. They did Phillips 66 gas stations back when they were full service back then.
Yeah, right.
Tires, batteries.
Come out, wash your windows and all that stuff.
Yeah, all that, yeah. and they did industrial lubricants and all this stuff. But my dad bought into this petroleum distributorship there, and so we were working young. We were painting bottle gas cylinders and oil tanks and stands, and just my dad had us working, which was great, and we developed good work ethics.
And this is so it's you, your sister,
My brother,
and your brother.
A younger brother.
Okay.
And my younger brother decided to go into the oil business, and when he made that decision as a junior in high school, he had made up his mind he wanted to come back and work in the oil business. That when he got through with college, my dad wanted us both to get business degrees. He wanted me to come back too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm a little more like my dad. Not that my brother isn't, but I'm a lot like my dad because my dad did his own thing.
Right.
And so he offered me a job to come back, but I looked and I saw, well, got my mom there, my dad there, my sister's working there some, my brother's going to come in and work there, and I love them.
Right.
But I just thought about it and I said, I'm a lot more like my dad in this. I kind of want to chart my own course.
You're kind of a dreamer?
I will give my wife a lot of credit, Paige. She has stretched me and grown me in such great ways to see beyond what I probably would have looked at, which is good. I'm kind of I'm looking at what's in front of me guy.
Okay.
And she taught me how to maybe vision and look ahead more. So,
really?
Uh-huh.
I would have thought you would have been more like a dreamer, given being a CEO, and I just sort of thought that would have been. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think when I first started, so just quickly how that happened, I went to ECU and I got my business degree in 81, and my dad offered me a job, and the job market wasn't great then, and so I decided to go back to MBA school, and in doing that, I'd gone through college, and just so you know, so I cheered for ECU. I was a cheerleader.
Really?
Head cheerleader my senior year. Picked my wife up, never put her down. I got pictures. So
you got to send those. That's awesome.
Okay, you have to remind me at the end.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then I became Petey the Pirate after I graduated. When I was in grad school, the last year I was in grad school.
And you said you were the first pirate.
I was the first Petey. Not the first pirate, the first one in the big.
Okay, yeah,
and I've got a picture. I can give you that too.
That's going to be on here too.
Okay. So where was I going with that?
You went back to get your MBA.
Yeah, I went back to get my MBA, and the thing that I picked up on is I also dove for ECU. So I'm one of few that have lettered in 3 things in athletics. Cheerleading was a letter. Diving for ECU, I was a diver for ECU, and I lettered as the mascot. So
wow.
Yeah,
you kind of on the Heineken commercial. Yeah. The most interesting man in the world. Little bit is what you got.
I don't think so, but that's funny.
That's good.
So I was doing so much in undergraduate between swimming, cheering, diving,
mm-hmm.
cheering, and having a good time.
Right.
That what I did in my classes is I studied hard. I went to class and I memorized things for the test.
Mm.
And I'd graduated. I was fortunate to graduate with a 3.34 grade point average.
Yeah.
And but when I got out, I'd done all this stuff, so I was well rounded. But I realized when I went and started interviewing for jobs that that I didn't study those things in school so that I might be able to apply those later. And that doesn't mean I didn't get some of that.
Right.
Because some of my life experiences really teach you how to apply things. Like I mentioned earlier, like you learn what not to do in some situations, right? And so my as I just look at that, I went back and got my MBA, and when I graduated from MBA school, the dean of the business school, Ernie Ure, he kind of took a liking to me, and he just asked me, hey, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I said, well, I've got an opportunity to go back and work in the oil business, but there's this girl, and she's got another year of grad school to go because she decided to stay and go to grad school. Paige did. And I realized that she was the one. So I said, well, I'd like to get a job around here. And he says, well, I'm going to get you an interview with this company as an office manager for A.B. Whitley Incorporated. They were a really large industrial, commercial, residential painting contractor. And I really admired the gentleman that founded that business, A.B. Whitley. He had really bad arthritis when I got there. And but he had come from Rocky Mount with a paintbrush and a bucket, I'd call it that. And he started this painting contracting company. And in the mid-Atlantic states, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, they were the dominant player in that. Sandblasting water towers, painting, summer winds down at Indian Beach. They did all the wall painting and painting on that big giant. I mean, they very successful company. And in that, the 2 years I was there, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what not to do, like how not to treat people. No offense to them. I just learned so much from that. But real quick, back to my story about undergraduate. I had learned these things, but I really didn't have a lot I could apply. So when I went to MBA school, I went from sitting in undergraduate in the middle of the class or maybe near the back. I was on the front row in MBA school, and I was challenging the professor. Like, not rudely, but I was always asking questions,
hungry,
always going for, because I realized I had 2 years of this program to put myself in a position, and now I was starting to think entrepreneurially, to be in a position to really be able to provide for a future wife and hopefully family and all that. I thought about, that's a pretty important thing that I've got ahead of me, and I need to get serious about it. And so I did, and did well in MBA school. All that to say, graduated from there, and the dean got me this interview, and I learned how to load trucks and order paint and mix paint. And so the office manager job was whatever it takes to get it
jack
done,
of all trades,
which was really good, So I learned a lot there, and one night, my wife and I, Paige, we lived out in Lake Ellsworth. We were at Krispy Kreme on 10th Street.
Heck,
back then, not the one on the corner now. This was when it was in a cinder block building where, right near where Starbucks and Subway are on 10th Street. It was just a cinder block building. And we were in there, and this is nothing against the Krispy Kreme folks. They're great. Miss Pulley, as a matter of fact, I don't think she's still there, but I'd met her. They were packed. I mean, it was just so many people coming in and out of there. And I looked at Paige, I said, they need some competition. And so I ended up looking into the Dunkin' Donut franchise.
No way.
I did. And a year later, in 1985, October 4th of 1985, I opened the first Dunkin' Donuts in Greenville, out by the hospital where the Boost Mobile store is now.
Right there in the corner of,
Memorial and
10th. It's
Stantonsburg Road. Yeah. And so that was an interesting business because everything was made from scratch. Now everything is
shipped in,
frozen. You thaw it, heat it, frost it, serve it, fill it, whatever you do. And back then everything was made from scratch. Yeast.
No kidding.
Yeah. Like we bought these big blocks of Anheuser-Busch yeast for making beer, but one of their big products they sold was yeast, and you'd crumble it into this. I mean, it was very interesting.
How long do you own that for?
Well, it was a 24/7, 363 business, and minimum wage was $3.35, and I was having to pay people $4 to $5 an hour just to get them to work, and then the midnight shift is when. I'll use not the 80-20 rule, but 70% of our sales were in the morning between 6 and 11. So you had to have the product in the case if you were going to be successful. And most of that was made from 11 at night till 6
shift
in the morning. Yeah. So I worked a lot of those because people wouldn't come in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I guess that's probably getting a little ahead of ourselves. So you so are you finished MBA, and then you worked for the paint company, and then you immediately jumped into Dunkin' Donuts.
Bought the franchise.
Okay. And then how about, so that's all professional, so how about the personal side? Where are you at with that, with with Paige and with everything else?
We got married on New Year's Eve in 1983 because she still had a semester of graduate school to go, and we figured, hey, we'll do it on New Year's Eve. We'll invite people, and they'll probably come because they get to celebrate New Year's Eve.
Yeah, right.
But we did get married on December 31st, 1983, and we got a neat story. We were best friends. It was a strictly platonic relationship when we got started.
Is she from Roanoke Rapids too?
She's from Jamestown near High Point.
Okay.
And she followed her boyfriend here, who was a North Carolina top swimmer in the butterfly, and he was recruited to come here and swim for East Carolina.
So did you guys swim together?
Well,
is that when you got into swimming?
how I got into swimming is a really interesting story, because one day they had free play when I was a sophomore in Minji's Natatorium. So I went in there, and I'd grown up in Roanoke Rapids, and we had a 1 meter and a 3 meter board at the recreation center. And I'll say, you talking about vision earlier, I am a calculated risk taker. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, I didn't calculate quite as good, but I was a risk taker. And so I learned to flip and spin and do all this stuff off the diving boards. I mean, when I was in high school, young.
Right.
So when I went to DC, one day I was in there swimming some laps, and I got up and started flipping off the boards and doing stuff. And here comes this guy down from the office and says, "Hey man, where'd you learn to dive like that?" And I said, "Well, at the rec center back in Roanoke Rapids." He goes, "Hey, you want to dive for ECU?"
That's how you got it?
I'm not kidding. And I went, "Huh? What?" He goes, "Man, we need a good diver. You're pretty good. You can flip and do all this stuff. I think you can do all the requirements. You might get us some points, and we need points." I said, "No, I'm not interested in doing that." He said, "I'll get you some free stuff." Now, we call that swag.
Right,
now.
right.
So he didn't say swag. He said, "Hey, I can get you some cool warm-ups and
some tearaway pants."
And yeah, all this stuff. And I said, "No, I'm not interested." He goes, "Listen, man, we really need some help on the team with a diver, and you're pretty good. I think we can help you and get better." I said, "Might I have to wear one of those Speedos?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Yeah." I said,
I'm out.
"I'm out." Yeah, I didn't say that the way we do now. "Hey, I'm out." I went, "No, I don't think so." But he said, "Hey, we've got these square cut suits that are bigger that the divers wear." And so I thought about it. I was up there diving. He came back down when I was leaving. He said, "Will you do it?" And I went, "I'll do it, but I'm only going to do home meets. I'm not traveling."
Oh, really?
I said, "I can't do travel. I'm cheering for East Carolina. I got my studies. I was taking 18 hours that semester." I said, "I just can't do it, but I'll come help. I'll do home meets." And I ended up doing more than home meets because I did it 3 years. But the last couple years, I traveled some.
Right.
But I was still cheering, so it was conflict, but I did that. So that was kind of interesting that I ended up diving for ECU and actually won some meets in the CAA, Colonial Athletic. We had the conference meet, and out of 21 divers, I finished 5th. I didn't get top 3.
Still, I mean,
I was an amateur, but they worked with me and taught me some of the finer points, and I got better.
That's amazing.
It was funny, actually. It's just funny. It's hilarious, really, that I ended up doing that.
Right. So, one of those things would be interesting. Like if you were just Petey the Pirate, that would be really interesting. If you were a swimmer who got recruited basically while you were just swimming around in the pool, that would be interesting. Mm-hmm. And then, what was the third thing? Cheerleader. You're a male cheerleader. I mean, that's really interesting. But all 3 of those that's incredible.
So, quick story about cheerleading. I came here my freshman year. I had a girlfriend from high school that was a year behind me, and I really liked her a lot. I mean, I thought she might be the one. We dated, but in March of my freshman year, she wrote me a Dear Mike letter and broke up with me.
Oh no.
Dear John, Dear Mike letter.
Right.
And it hurt, but I was okay because I would go home every weekend. I didn't really participate in college doing a lot of downtown and going out with people, and I didn't do a lot of football
That never
games.
was your scene?
Well, I had this girlfriend back home, and I really liked her, and the lake was there. My parents lived in Roanoke Rapids, but they had a little cabin on the lake. So all that to say, that she broke it off with me. And that summer, I was working in my dad's convenience stores with the petroleum company. And I got off morning shift one day and was going to go to the recreation center to play basketball. Loved playing basketball. I was 5'5" and 205 as a senior in high school. And by my sophomore year, I was 6'2.5" and about 190, 180.
Dang.
Yeah.
Were you hanging from the ceiling, stretching out or something? What
I
happened?
don't know what
That's
happened.
insane.
It is insane.
7 inches. I mean,
Yeah.
hold on.
Almost
yeah,
8.
yeah. Wow.
But I don't. I do that and get distracted on my story.
No,
here.
you're good.
Okay. So where was I on that? We're talking about
You were going back home. You just got broken
my
up with
girlfriend.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm getting ready to go to the rec center to play some basketball, and the phone rings. And you got to remember, this isn't no cell. There's a wall phone with a long stretch out cord.
Yeah, you pick up that phone. You don't know who's on the other end.
Yeah, I pick up the phone, and it's Karen Jones. Now, Karen Jones happened to be my freshman year roommate who was from Roanoke Rapids, and he was a year ahead of me, and he went to East Carolina. Kent Chamberlain, great guy, played basketball for Roanoke Rapids. And she was a cheerleader, Karen was, at Roanoke Rapids. So she went to ECU, he was at ECU. I went to ECU as a freshman and roomed with him in Scott Dorm. And I was home that summer, and my phone rings, and she goes, "Hey, Mike, it's Karen." And I knew her pretty well because she was the girlfriend of my roommate.
Yeah, right.
And I said, "Hey, Karen, what's up?" And she says, "Hey, when are you going back to ECU?" And I said, "Probably the day before reading day." And she goes, "You ought to go back a week early." And I go, "Well, why would I do that?" She goes, "You need to try out for cheerleading." And I go, "Huh?" She says, "Yeah, Mike, you're pretty athletic. You've gotten taller. You'd be a great cheerleader." I said, "Karen, I don't want to be a cheerleader." And she said, "Well, I heard you and Sandra broke up." And I said, "We did." She says, "You dating anybody?" I went, "No." And she said, "You really ought to go back to ECU early and try out for cheerleading."
I see what she's doing here.
Yeah. And I said, "Karen, I'm not going back to try out for cheerleading." She goes, "Well, that's too bad because you'd meet a lot of good-looking girls." So there was this awkward silence or pause. And I went, "So when do those tryouts start?"
I'm super interested.
So I went back, tried out for cheerleading, and made it. There was
Wow.
one spot available, and I got fortunate enough that I was pretty athletic, and I worked hard at it, and I went and tried out, and I got the spot. So that was kind of cool. Changed the trajectory. That one phone call changed
Right.
the entire trajectory of my life.
Isn't that
because
wild?
I was more introverted, honestly, and cheerleading created. You
Yeah.
had to be extroverted.
Yeah.
And I would have never met Paige because she was a JV cheerleader when I was my first year as a sophomore cheerleading. And I was on the varsity squad, and JVs were all girls. But we ended up going to the Independence Bowl that year. Pat Dye was a great coach who's passed away now, was a great football coach here. And we went to the Independence Bowl, and I rode in a Winnebago with all these JV cheerleaders, talked about the good-looking girls, and Paige was one of them. And we ended up talking a lot and getting to know each other, and we became good friends. She still had her boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just kind of cool how that worked out.
So when did that change? So you were kind of just the friend zone, as we call it today, but for maybe 3 years, 4 years?
3 years. We were best friends.
Okay.
We really were. We went to movies together. It was strictly platonic.
Right.
She had her boyfriend, Mark, and all that. And so when I graduated in 81, I was dating this girl, and she invited me to come meet her parents. We'd been dating about 6 or 7 months. And that night, I got there on a Friday night, and we were sitting around the table. And right there at dinner, her mom said, "When do you think y'all will get married?"
Oh, wow. 6 or 7 months in.
Mm-hmm. Well, she had invited me home to see her parents. And she and I really liked each other. She's just a sweet, great girl. But when that question got asked of me, because I had not thought ahead, which I've learned a lot there is another lesson. What went in my head was, if you marry her, you're not going to get to be with Paige.
Really? That was a thought then?
The exact thought.
Get out of here.
And I knew right then
That was the moment
that I was in love with Paige, and that I couldn't. That this wasn't gonna work.
What?
So I won't tell all the rest of the story. She was great about it.
Right.
Because when I told her, "Hey," when your mom asked that question, she goes, "I'm really sorry she did that." And I said, well, it made me realize that I'm in love with Paige. She goes, well, I already knew you loved Paige.
Shut your mouth. Really?
She sure did. She said, yeah, I've known that. It's just obvious. You light up when you get around her. So,
Wow.
but I really like this girl. I don't get into names and stuff.
Yeah,
but anyway,
right.
Yeah, she was a great girl. And we had a lot of fun together. But so this is funny part of this story. So I told her, I'm going to go home tomorrow morning. I'm going to just leave. And she said, that's fine. She was good about it, this girl.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way back to Lake Gaston was right by Jamestown. So I stopped on 85 at a gas station leaving this girl's house. And I go to the payphone, and I know Paige's number by heart, 919-454-2626. That's her home number. We're best friends.
Yeah.
Now, it's changed to 336 now. The area code stuff changed since then.
That was back when you had to remember numbers.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there was no cell phone. I went to a payphone and put quarters in and dialed her up.
What was your plan?
Well, her mother answered the phone. I said, hey, Miss Stout. I mean, I knew her mom and dad really well.
Right.
And I said, hey, I'm gonna be coming through. And she didn't know where I had gone and done. We didn't talk about all that.
Right.
We'd gone home for the summer.
Right.
I said, hey, I'm gonna be riding through. I'd love to stop by and see you. And she said that would be great. Now I'm not gonna talk and tell her part of the story, but I ended up stopping in there and spending the night and staying with her for the weekend. And her mom, Betty, after I left, they were sitting at dinner table, and she told Paige, she says, Paige, I think you're in love with that guy. And she goes, you think so? She goes, yeah, I think you are. She says, well, maybe I am. And she says, well, you better kiss him. Because, y'all been friends.
Right. Right.
So anyway, I went back for grad school. She came back for her final semester of undergraduate before she went to grad school. And we were down at the elbow room and a couple of beers and all that. Next thing I know, we're kissing. So the rest is just plays right on out. So, yeah. But that phone call to go back and try out for cheerleading, no kidding. Just think about how that changed the entire trajectory of the friends I made, the people I knew, the woman that became my wife. Wouldn't have my children today without them, without that having happened. One phone call.
Even then, what if your previous girlfriend's mom didn't say, when are you guys getting married? When's that light bulb go off for you, Yeah,
I don't know. That's correct. Yeah.
One of my favorite phrases is either everything in life is a miracle or nothing is. And that's what I think about when I hear your stories. Like, there's all these little pieces, and if you just look at them, they all seem random, right? Like, they're all random, but then they all fit together perfectly in this puzzle. And here you are sitting right here. And all those puzzle pieces sort of made this where you are now.
Yeah.
So
we get married, and just thinking about that, and got into the Dunkin' Donut business, and it was, like I said, 24/7, 363. And it was we opened a second store right across from Hastings Ford where the Walgreens is now.
Yep.
We opened a second store in 88. We had Olivia. We had one child, a little girl. And then in 89 we had Carly, our second girl. And in 92 we had Michael, our third child. And I sold the Dunkin' Donuts. It was just a lot. I mean, it was a lot. Everything being made from scratch and being able to get people that could do it and do it well. It was challenging. And look, I slept on bags of donut mix and stuff. I mean, it was,
wow.
Yeah, it was a, and part of that goes back on me not being as smart. Maybe I wasn't as wise but during that time, labor was interesting, no different than it is now.
Right.
It's kind of circled back around. But it was very interesting, and just getting people to work third shift was very challenging.
Do you feel like it was kind of rocking you from a personal life standpoint with 3 young children, marriage, like kind of taking its toll there?
It was. And like, I'd go to church on Sundays. I'd be off if I was off on Sunday or somebody didn't not show
Call
up.
off,
Right? Yeah. But I'd be half asleep because I was exhausted. It was certainly not healthy And
What made-
Paige is a saint. Just gonna tell you, I'm just saying. My wife is just she's special. I mean, we all think who we marry are special, but she's a remarkable, amazing person because she had to work with me through all that, and it was
Tough times.
they weren't the easiest because I hadn't got to the part that got hard, so we decided to sell them. We were going to change. And I was going to stay in the food business and run a sandwich shop and do some catering. And we put it up for sale, and Duncan has to approve the person that takes over. And they did. And I sold both stores, and won't get into all the finances, but I owner financed too much of it to him. And 5 months later, he filed bankruptcy on me.
Oh, no.
So all the leases came back on me.
It's like you couldn't get away from it.
Well, you don't have first right to re-enter either. Duncan does. So they could either put somebody in there, or I could buy the franchises again, which I wasn't going to do because I hadn't gotten paid for them.
Yeah, right.
So it was a tough time. We faced bankruptcy 3 times from 91 to 94. And quite honestly, I look back and I think, gosh, those were such hard times. And in the midst of that, we had our 3rd child. I'm in the catering business. I'm at Rock Springs Equestrian Center running the food and beverage for Phil Flowers Jockey Club.
Oh, wow.
And I'm doing all this off-site catering. About 50% of my business was off-site catering. And we did all that. Like, we're facing bankruptcy. A couple times we dodged that. We get through it. We get them get settled. We arrange the deal and get it settled. But the 3rd time was the final last time was on this equipment package. There was this one last thing that was still hanging over our heads, and GE Capital had leased this restaurant equipment for the 2nd store, and still owed them about $65,000 on about $130,000 equipment package of signs and all that.
Right.
So this was a really not sure how vulnerable to be here. I would say hardest and most pivotal point in my life because we were facing bankruptcy for the 3rd time. I'm working, and I'm not saying this like it's not a bragging right. I was working over 100 hours a week in the food business to try to pay people off and do things.
Just staying alive.
Stay alive. 3 kids. And at the same time, you have to pile this in. I don't mean in a bad way. So Michael's born in 92, and in 94 he starts having grand mal seizures. Paige's mom and dad, her dad, ends up coming down with Alzheimer's, and it progresses quickly. And her mom has a stroke in the shower, and she's in a nursing home, paralyzed on one side. And I'm working, like.
Right.
It was just.
And you got this GE thing, the 3rd bankruptcy, all the perfect storm. Yeah.
And so $60,000, whatever it was, and my bankruptcy attorney, Randy Daub, who the bankruptcy court's named after up here in Greenville, and he's passed away since then. And that's a God story in that. And I give God all the credit for it, but when I was facing it the last time, he said, Mike, you're going to have to go ahead and file bankruptcy. And I said, I don't want to do it. Because back then, now there's a bankruptcy court for people. It's easier. But if you were, back in the 90s, if you file bankruptcy, that's pretty much it. You're never going to own another thing. It would just be very difficult.
Like the kiss of death sort of to your business career.
Yes, correct. And so I didn't want to file. And we had about $10,000 in the bank. And I was prideful. I didn't call my mom and dad. They probably would have helped me. But I just felt like I'd made a mess, and I had to deal with it. And I was really relying on God a lot during that time. I was drawn a lot closer to him. As a matter of fact, we were faced with this situation, and I had an insurance policy. My wife and I did. And I thought, if I drive home tonight, I could run off the road, and my family would be better off
without
me, because they wouldn't. Because I'm at this point, I feel like I'm a terrible provider, right? I mean, it was a low. point.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't think I was going to go there. Sorry, but
No, I mean, I think that speaks. That's it right there. That's powerful.
yeah. But anyway, that's one of the times, and I can name probably 2 hands full that I really felt God speak to me in that moment, and because I was seriously thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and He said, "That's not the plan I have for you." And so we had $10,000 in the bank. I called the attorney back and I said, "Hey, I want you to call them and tell them we'll send them $10,000. That's everything I've got right now in the bank." And he said, "Mike, they're not going to take that." And I said, "Well, I prayed about it and feel like I've heard from God about it, and I believe they'll take it." He goes, "They're not going to take it, Mike. We need to go ahead and file." I said, "Will you at least ask them?
Just try.
Just ask them." He goes, "They're not going to take it." I said, "You're my attorney. I want you to call them and offer it to them." He goes, "All right, I'll do it, but they're not going to take it." So we hang up. Again, remember, there's no...
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I did have a bag phone at that
Oh,
point.
heck yeah.
In the van for catering. Bring more meatballs. The meatball says that too. I felt like a meatball. Oh my goodness. So I don't know. 20, 30 minutes later, the phone rings in my office. I go answer it. He goes, "Your prayers have been answered.
No kidding.
Get me the money over here right now. Bring me a check. They're going to take it." Yep. And so, after 3 times, we got through it. Crazy. It's a but God story.
Yeah. In a certain way, do you almost miss those times? Because you were so desperate for, you'd fallen out. You had nothing. Well, you did, but you felt like you had nothing. Do you kind of almost miss that time a little bit in a weird way?
I don't. What I can tell you is I have such an appreciation for what God's done in my life. And I wouldn't be the person I am today had I not gone through those things. And it's been, it's gone on and on, just things, and just me seeing God's faithfulness to me and to my family, amazing stuff. So how do I move this along? Just about, so we get through that, and in 95 is my last year at the Jockey Club at Rock Springs, because Phil, who I really respect a lot, he came to me and said, "Look, you're making all the money here in the food business. I'm putting all the money into these facilities." And I said, "Well, you are doing a lot, but I'm also the one picking up beer bottles after wedding receptions at 1 o'clock in the morning." Anyway, we had a good laugh, but he wanted to buy he wanted to own the food business. It got to a place he needed to make that money. And I thought he and I got along good, but when you're not wanted somewhere, it's probably not best to try to stay. Right?
Yeah. That's a good word.
Yep. So we wrestled over the sales price. I didn't own or finance one penny.
Lesson learned.
Well, I had this guy that was, it's funny, the guy that I sold the Dunkin' Donuts to one time said, now Mr. Aman, he would never call me Mike, he'd call me Mr. Aman. He said, there's no education from the second kick of a mule. You have to think about it.
I did have to.
I know, everybody. And I go, what do you mean? And I thought to myself, okay, so there's no education from the second kick of a mule. And I would now look at my life and go, look, I've been kicked by a lot of mules, but I try to never back up behind the same one twice.
That's so good. That's good. So you didn't own or finance?
I didn't own or finance that.
Yeah.
I was so, what we'd gone through, and just what was on in our life with their parents sick, Michael sick. Gosh. So, but by the grace of God, we got through all that. I sold to Phil. I took my family to Disney World. And I got back, and I had some opportunities to go back in the food business. And I'm not going to tell a couple of the stories just because it's too long and probably not relevant, but very interesting at some point. So I'm having coffee with a buddy of mine at Boulevard Bagel, not the one that's out here, but when it was on Arlington.
By the creamery.
Mm-hmm. And he said, hey, man, what are you going to do? And I go, I don't know. I've got a couple opportunities in the food business. He said, you ought to start a communications business. And I go, huh? Why would I do that? He goes, look, I'm in the Yellow Pages, and everybody that I call on complains about the local telephone company. Now there's all this long distance because it got deregulated in 83. There's cell phones, there's pagers, there's internet, there's email now, there's all this stuff going on. And I went, okay, that's interesting. So we got through drinking coffee, we left, and I said, hey, let me ask you something. So what you're saying is if there was a company that came alongside other business and helped them save time and money on their communication services, that'd be a good business. And he said, that'd be a great business. So at that point, I decided to, because he was Yellow Page guys, I got into some training classes and learned all those acronyms in the telecom business.
Yeah.
And I learned all those, and I started studying, and I went and met with U.S. Cellular people, and back then 360, before it became Alltel, before it became Verizon.
Yep.
I met with all those people, and I started looking at how you make money and how you save people money in this business. And it was kind of confusing, but if you studied it hard enough, you could figure it out. So the goal ended up being providing business customers one number to call and one bill to pay for all communication services. And so started with 3 or 4 people in 96 and 133 people in 2016. And now we gross billed, so one number to call, one bill to pay. We took a lot of risk. We paid people's bills in advance and then sent them one bill, and they paid us not only for all the bills we paid, but for our managed service fee to look after all of it, right? And so we started at 0, and in 2016, our gross billing, meaning all the bills we paid and our fee, was $77 million a year. So the cash flow requirements for that were a little over $6 million a month. So I joke with people that I kind of became the master of the cash flow because I had to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I had a great bank, BB&T Truist, which is an interesting story. When I went to start this business, I went back to all my catering customers and asked for their telecom bills and said, I want to analyze them, see if I can help you save time and money. And then I took those analysis with me to the bank to borrow the money. And the bank looked at it and said, like they normally would, who else is doing this? And I went, nobody. We're going to be the first ones. They didn't like that.
Yeah.
And I get it. And they said, well, let us look this over, and can we call you in a couple days? I said, yeah. 2 days later, Kelly White was my banker. She was great. And a guy named John Charles Thompson. But Kelly was great. And she called and said, hey, we're ready to meet with you. And I went in there. This is, again, I'm giving all the credit to God in this. So we sit down and they go, Mike, we're not real sure about this business, but we're pretty sure you'll pay us back if we loan you the money.
That's all they care about.
Well, and you have to realize, looking back, they'd seen me fight through facing bankruptcy 3 times and always got everybody paid. So their comment, we're pretty sure you'll pay us back, was they had seen that I had done that. So it's just...
That's incredible.
Again, the Lord's faithfulness to me and his faithfulness, it's just been incredible how things have worked out. It's not lost on me. We make decisions. There's always consequences. We were talking about everything in life as a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
If I became a workaholic in the food business and a workaholic in the first years at OneSource. And so what did I trade off for that? And I did. I traded off family time, time with God, time with friends. There were a lot of, I would say, poor choices by me, but when you're in that situation, you're in survival mode, right? And so I did what I believe was best at the time to survive. But my relationship with God just kept growing and growing and growing over that time because I continued to see his hand of faithfulness to me and circumstances that taught me a lot. Like I said, I learned a lot in that process. So
the relationship with God piece you've brought in several times. Have you always had that faith?
well, make it quick. I was baptized when I was 13 or 14 years old. I went to a Baptist church in Rock Rapids, went through the baptism class and all that. But it was actually as a sophomore at college, there was a guy in my suite named Harry Rumley. He was a navigator, and he saw I was living large, cheerleader, doing this, going downtown, doing all kinds of fun stuff. And one day he just confronted me about my faith in God.
Mm.
And I'm thankful to this day because he challenged me,
Uh-huh.
checked me. If it was like hockey, he checked
Yeah,
me
right.
against the board. And he was such a great guy, too. And he didn't just ask me about it. He started providing me some resources for a Bible study and stuff, and says, I want to challenge you to read your Bible daily, and I want you to and to do these things and develop your relationship with God. And so if God hadn't used Harry Rumley in my life, I don't know where I'd be today. And he moved on. He graduated. He was a senior. I have no idea where he is, but God used him in my life, and he was a neat guy.
Mm.
So that started this reading scripture. And after my wife and I were married, even though you think, well, you were working in this, we were in a Bible study, and we spent a lot of time in God's Word, in the Bible, and we learned a lot about who God is and about God.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. I was having a conversation with my 30-year-old son yesterday, because he was talking about, we were talking about God on the way back from Beaufort, and we were just talking about it, and he was saying, well, you and Mom have taught me all this stuff, and I believe all this. And I said, well, Michael, you got to make it personal.
Mm.
And he goes, yeah, it's personal. I said, well, it's one thing to know a lot about God, but there's another to know him personally, to have a personal relationship with him. Now, Michael's got some pretty severe learning disabilities because of the seizures. He's got
Sure.
a chromosome abnormality. He's the biggest blessing in the world to all of our kids are, but he's precious.
Why do you say that?
For a young man, they thought, I didn't tell you this, my wife and two other ladies and the three couples, we started the Greenville Learning Center here in Greenville for kids with learning disabilities.
Awesome.
And Michael's got a published book. It's incredible. I'll just look at that. If I took that one story in my life to see what God's done, in his life. And I've got another daughter who was a prodigal, and oh my goodness, what she's done. And then I've got my oldest daughter who's amazing. Of course, we're going to say that about our kids,
Sure,
but I'm
right.
just telling you stories.
Did you struggle with that? With your your one daughter was a prodigal. Did you struggle with that?
It's neat that throughout my life, whether it be, we talked about the bankruptcy or Harry and the
Right.
bankrupt and these things, there have been times in my life where they're different, but there are things where God calls you to be drawn close to him. Because you can either try to do it yourself and depend on yourself to make everything happen, or you can trust God. And it doesn't mean you don't have to do your part.
Right.
Like my daughter that's a prodigal, when she went to treatment once and it just didn't work. She got 2 DWIs, and I'm not saying that to say bad. She's amazing.
Yeah, right,
She's
right.
amazing now.
I've heard, as a side note, I've
Carly.
heard great things about her.
Oh, look,
great things.
What God's done in her life, she
Yeah.
can't deny it. She's
Right.
seen it, how God works. So I meet this guy through C12 group named Frank Dees, who's Robert Beeman's son-in-law. And right after the earthquake in 80 in 2010, we go down there to help out and to help people. Strong, able-bodied guys, we're going to go down there and help people.
Yeah.
So we're down there, and we meet this guy named John Fitz, who's with Kadasha. I'm doing a new thing. That's what that means.
Wow.
And, Haiti was wrapped up in voodoo and witchcraft. Haiti's got still has a lot of issues. But I went down there, and I didn't know God was doing this. So I go down, and I'm in Haiti, and we're serving, and we go back another time and serve. And then my daughter's gone to treatment Florida this time. We've got referred to a Christian-based rehab center for her, and I'm asking her about what her plan is, because she's already started ECU. She cheered at ECU, and then I gotta be careful. I mean,
Yeah.
Anyway, she got taken advantage of in college. Okay, and that created this downward spiral, and that's what led to all that. And I say that not to defend her, because it does defend what happened.
Well, trauma is the root of all addiction.
Correct.
And I think we forget that. We think they just really like beer, they really enjoy drugs. No. Trauma is the root of all addiction.
That's a good word. Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
so you don't have to sit here and, I mean, it wreaks havoc, but I often find that, I mean, I'm 4 years sober myself, and it's like until you identify what you're drinking or what you're using to get away from, you'll never do it. Until you address that, what happened. So I think that's a really important, what you're saying is a really important for people. It's not just an isolation of they just like to drink at all. That's such an awful stereotype.
Agreed, 100%. So, but it's the coolest thing, because she's getting ready to get out of treatment after 6 weeks, and we get one phone call with her each week, and I'm saying, hey, you got your plan? You want to come back to school? What you want to do? And she goes, I'm not sure yet. And I said, well, be praying about it, because she had started. I mean, she was turning. She was starting to. I hate to use the word see the light, but she realized she had to get things turned around.
She is something bigger than herself.
Yes. And so I think we're about 3 weeks away from her getting out. And I said, have you feel like you got a plan yet? No, not yet. I said, well, do you care if I have one? She goes, that scares me. So I took her to Haiti. I picked her up. I flew down, picked her up, and we flew to Haiti. And we arranged it.
Right.
And there was an orphanage and children's home where we were already serving. And I asked my buddy, said, geez, that I'd met down there through this guy. I mean, there ain't no coincidence. There are God incidences that happen.
Miracles.
They're miracles. There are. And so she said, yeah, I'll go with you, because she loved kids. She'd already been to Tijuana, Mexico, to an orphanage there to help kids with Young Life. A good friend of mine, Sid Bradshaw, who ran Young Life here for a long time, is now at Heart for E&C. She went with him, and she went to Bulgaria too.
Wow.
To do work with children with Covenant one time, church. But I say all that to say she went down there, and God totally used these children and all that, and it changed the trajectory of her life.
That's amazing. And I mean, and what, because I think there's two options. You can carry that shame with you of mistakes, and she's the prodigal one. Okay, she might be the prodigal one, but she can probably relate to some people that we and other people just can't relate to.
There's no doubt.
Like sometimes she walks through those things, but I think God has such a just crazy way to use the things that she probably hid and didn't want to share with anybody. Now she probably shares it all the time, and it helps people that never would have been helped otherwise.
What's the coolest thing is, she teaches Bible study for college girls in her house right now, and she's been doing that for a while. And she's living in the very house of one of mine and Paige's spiritual mentors, Nancy Dunn, who passed away early in 2022. Carly actually lives in her house and has fixed it up and is right around the corner from us. And she's teaching Bible studies there. And
that's amazing.
You just can't almost couldn't make it up. You know, that I look at it and I go, how could that be? It's pretty neat. Pretty neat.
And so, from what I understand, is you've since sold one source. Is that right?
I did.
Okay. And when was that?
2016, at the end of 2016.
Okay. And so, are you?
And I miss Chris Lau.
Oh,
I miss a lot of the people. I miss a lot of the people there, but they were like family to me. It was hard.
I've heard that. I've heard the culture that you built there was incredible. And I'm not just, like I said, I'm not just trying to tickle your ear or just say, I mean, I've genuinely heard that from many people. Or do you have your hand in anything now, like from a entrepreneurial standpoint?
Well, after I sold that, my C12, I've been in C12 for since 2006, so 10 years, 11 years. And I did take a year off after selling. I said I'm gonna commit to a year to spend more time to help my son become more interdependent off of us, and spend some time with my wife, travel a couple times. And then Robert Beeman, my chair, said, I want you to join me and become a chair and build some groups. And I went, well, gosh, I really looked at all these things that C12 did, and I really tried to implement them in the business. So,
Right.
I give God C12 and the willingness to do something with that stuff. So part of that's, I'm still part of the equation, but they worked through that to help me grow the company and build the company on, what I would call biblical principles, God-honoring principles. Matter of fact, when we added the additional building, when the concrete was poured and had dried, before they had some framed up walls, we actually had a kind of a party ceremony where we told the employees about it. We're going to literally have God's word written on the foundation of this business, and we went out and wrote. They could put whatever scriptures they wanted,
Right, on the studs and
well, actually on the concrete floor. We took permanent Sharpie big block markers, and people could write their scriptures. And I still have pictures of those to this day.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I sold that at the end of 2016, and then joined Robert in 2018, and became a C12 chair, and took over one group he had, and then built a second group. And God, the relationships I built through C12 with people still to this day, although I'm not a chair anymore, because one of my members was Greenville Produce Company, Keith Purvis, who's one of the finest people I've ever met and know. COVID hit in 2020, and he was probably 80% restaurants and 20% institutional on produce deliveries. And so they quit ordering. And so it didn't look great. And that was another time when God spoke to me when it was time to sell One Source. It was clear. And that's a neat story, but I won't share it. But anyway.
I remember you saying one time, I can't remember where I heard it, I think it was One Source. You told your wife you felt like you were having an affair with her with your work. And that, to me, has always resonated with me years later.
She called me out in 2008, and she said, you have a mistress. And I said, no, I don't. You're having an affair. No, I'm not. Yeah, One Source. And it was true. It cut me to the quick, but it changed things. I mean, she's amazing. I'm just telling you, Paige is something special. So she, talk is cheap. Priorities are what we do. Everything else is just talk. And I got that from C12. They taught us. And so I started changing things. I just started.
It's pivot.
Yeah, pivoted. And had I not pivoted, One Source would not have done as well as it did.
Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy.
It took you stepping away a little bit to.
It took me refocusing. I wish I could tell you. A lot of times you don't take credit for your sayings. Your quotes. I don't have a lot, but there is one that I came up with, and I just said, where you put your focus and attention is where you'll get results.
Simple enough.
But how many?
But we
distracted. No, where you put your focus and attention, you'll get results. So where does it need to be? And that's what I learned, is where did my attention need to be? And it needed to be more into solving problems and trying to be the Superman in the business, to being really more like Jesus and saying, let me make disciples. Let me grow. Let me help grow other people to do these things.
And then how much easier was it for you 8 years later when you stepped away?
Oh,
because you'd kind of, I'm assuming,
night and day.
You'd kind of already been sort of letting other people lead, which is just not probably the way you were wired with the Dunkin' Donuts when you're out there making donuts in the back. Entirely different.
Entirely different. Yeah. So, it was, it's again, I just how much you reference. I reference the Lord in my life, but just faithfulness from Him and what He's taught me and what He showed me. And I was when I was a workaholic, this lady that I worked with, Sheila Jernigan, was my director of administration. And so back then I was kind of acting as CFO, chief operations, and CEO.
Right.
I was wearing a lot of hats. And one time, this is not proud of this at all. I would go to work at 3 a.m, come home at 6:30 or 7 at night, and go all day. Yeah. But the business was demanding. I mean, we were growing. It was demanding. And Sheila came to me one time, and I'd sent emails real early in the morning. I know people aren't up looking at their phone,
but you're just getting them.
But I'm setting the day.
No one else is there.
Everybody knows what they need to be working. We got a lot to do here. I was micromanaging. Okay.
Yep.
And she came to me and she says, "Why do you work like you do?" And I said, "Because all this stuff's got to get done." She goes, "No, there's something." She goes, "Now I see you in your quiet time. You come out of that little room back there, and I know you spend time with the Lord. You need to ask Him about that." Well, I so admired and respected her. It's the funniest thing. Her maiden name is Godly.
I better listen.
Sheila Godly Jernigan. And she was an amazing lady. God put her in my life for, and I think it was mutual back and forth as far as being a blessing to each other. But I spent some time in my quiet time, and one day I called her and I said, "I know the answer," and I told her what it was. And words can be hurtful. And so, I went back to childhood, and this work mentality, and being called lazy. And I decided I was going to make sure I proved that I was not that word. And there's more to it, but I want to be careful here.
So you think you think deep down in your life you were trying to prove that lie wrong?
Absolutely, 100%. And her calling me, questioning me on it, was part of God using her with that question to change, to make me pivot and change, along with my wife. And my best friend, other than my wife, Paige, and my kids are like my best friends now, but my best friend was Tim Balance, and he was the city exec for Wachovia Wells Fargo. And he died in 2012 from cancer. And he was really, we raised our kids together. They went to the same elementary school. He was my college roommate in grad school for a year. And he was a dear friend. And I actually went down to MD Anderson and spent a week with him.
He died young.
Oh, he did. He was in his he was like 51.
Yeah.
But it's not about me or you. It's about what God does to draw us to Himself. And I know Timmy. Tim is what everybody called him, but I called him Timmy.
Yeah.
It's just the coolest story about, God's word says the sower soweth the word, and the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And so I remember going down there, and I was always, when I would see Tim, we were doing things, and he was raised in a Baptist church from Fremont, North Carolina. Great, just the best guy in the world. And he when we were meeting, and we'd go to lunch every month, and we'd see each other a lot, and I was always, pardon the way I put this, peppering him with, where are you at in your walk with the Lord? How's that going? And they went to, I think, Oakmont Baptist Church at the time. But we were so close that I just we'd be engaged.
Yeah.
Paul says, didn't we share our very own lives with each other? he says in Hebrews, let the love of the brethren continue.
Mm-hmm.
And so he and I had that. And so he, so I would always be, and I don't want to say this in a not respectful way. You know, there's the expression, people drop the F-bomb.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, my daughter one time said, Dad, you're not afraid to drop the J-bomb. And I, you know, you earn the right to do that. You don't browbeat people with God's word or with, you know, this stuff. And I think back to people on New York Street, they're holding up a Bible and shouting, where are you going to spend eternity, this type of stuff. And I'm not saying God's not using them, because there may be a person that's at the end of themselves.
Right.
I know what that's like, to be at the end of yourself. I don't know if I told you that when I was in, but when I faced bankruptcy,
the life insurance.
Yeah, I got to the end of myself.
Yep.
Right, literally.
Yeah. Maybe that person right there, like you said, in the street, someone just walking ready to already planning it, already planning their exit, and that. Yeah. So I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So God works any way He chooses to. Right. We have to trust Him with that. But I would talk to Tim, and so he had been sick with cancer, and he had this lump on his neck, and he went to MD Anderson. He came back, and they had gotten it, so that was great. And during that time, when I was down there with him, I was just really praying for him and talking to him about salvation and making sure that he was. You're my best friend. I want to know you're good with God. And he came to my house one afternoon, late one afternoon, and I was in the driveway, and he pulled up and he says, "Hey, do you have a minute?" And I go, "Yeah." He said, "I'm gonna get in the car with you." And he jumped in the car with me, and he said, "Hey, I want to tell you a story." I said, "Okay." And I mean, I'm pretty happy now because he's gotten past cancer, right? He says, "Hey, you know, all those times you would be talking to me about the Lord and sharing scriptures with me and encouraging me in my walk with God." He goes, "I'm gonna give you an analogy. You would feed me that, and I would put it in my mouth. But when you weren't looking, I'd spit it out."
He told you that.
He goes, "And for years, I spit it out. He said, "But it's in me now."
No, take your time, man. That's tough.
Anyway, he said, "You don't have to worry about me." He said, "Jesus is my Savior and my Lord." Four months later, he's in Goldsboro, and he's at listening to some band, and they're eating and stuff, and he leans over to pick something up off the floor, and he comes up, and he can't talk. Cannot talk. So he cannot talk. He can't, it's not good. So I got a call. And said, "Hey, Timmy's not good. He's at the hospital." And my daughter was in town from Florida State at the time. She went to Florida State. And she actually went with me to the hospital to see Timmy. And when I walked in there, he couldn't talk, but he went, "Wow," because he had a tumor here. And they ended up operating on him and getting that. But later it metastasized, and he had a bunch of tumors and things. And his son Adam worked with me for a while at One Source. He's a great young man.
How cool was that?
It's cool. And I was in Haiti with Carly, just thinking about all these things going on. Paige and I went down, not to take Carly to Haiti. I took Carly to Haiti. We went down to visit her. And I just left Timmy over at Wayne Memorial Hospital, and he wasn't doing great. He wasn't. But I didn't think, like, he's right near.
Yeah, he's
death.
right on the step of eternity.
Death. Yeah, right, on the doorstep of eternity. And so we're down there, and Sheila, my lady at One Source, she emailed me down there. I could get email. And she said, "Hey, I hate to tell you this, but Timmy passed." And Adam has called me and asked me, would you speak at his funeral? And of course, can't say no to that. Your best friend, other than Paige and I. So we cut our trip short. We had to rebook flights to get back. And his funeral, what would they say about you? Well, no, what would they say?
Mm-hmm.
His life was cut short in my mind, but he had a full life, and he ended well. As a matter of fact, he'd go out in the boat, and the back of this boat that he went out on had the word live well. You know how they have a live well for the fish, but it was really live well.
Yeah.
And that was his saying the whole time after he got diagnosed with cancer, was live well, live well. And he did that the best he could through his last days. And that was hard. He died in April of 2012. And Carly came home in June of 2012 from Haiti. She had been there 6 months. And when she was 13, she asked me would I learn to surf with her. And 13-year-old daughters are not that interested in hanging with their dads.
So
I said, yes, I will. So we learned to surf together, and she and I have been to El Salvador and Costa Rica and some Nicaragua and some places surfing, and we've developed a good, that's been a kind of a special thing for her.
For you and her?
Yeah, but she's grown up. She's now got a little boy, I got a grandson from her, and she's busy with her career, and so surfing is not a priority anymore, for her, and that's okay. Seasons, that was one thing I'd share here is just, people say, golly, I don't have time for this. I said, well, you're in a different season of life now. Ecclesiastes talks about, times and seasons of life, and they're different, and you have to treasure each one.
And I think too, be willing to let go of seasons that have passed. A
lot of people don't like to.
Right. It's like I was telling my wife this morning, before we recorded, I told you, it's like the house is a mess. You have a 12 and a 9-year-old, you just feel like one's in baseball, one's in trying out for cheer, and school's starting, and you're just like, it's just really fast. And we were just talking about how, like I said, the house wasn't picked up, and I can't remember what the laundry wasn't done or whatever, and I just thought there's going to be a time where we're going to miss this. And I know, obviously, it's Darius Rucker who has that song, or it might be Trace Atkins. I can't remember, but you're going to miss this.
Yes.
And I think that's just the passing of seasons. And then there will be a time where we are empty nesters, and we need to be willing to let go of this particular season with children, because I think we'll miss it.
Mm-hmm.
But be willing. You're also still sitting in a new season and trying to embrace that too. The season concept is one that I love. I'm not great at it, but I mean, like just the chapters of a book,
Yes. I think one of the things, where I said you put your focus and attention, you get results. I think there's something about intentionality, and I'm always working at this. I mean, I'm 63, almost 64, and I'm still working at this, but I would say don't miss moments. So these moments that you have with your kids at this age, the question is, when you ask yourself, and I had this, we did lunch and learns at One Source all the time with Bible studies and stuff like that. And one of them was by Andy Stanley, and he said the best question ever is this question. He said, in light of your past history, so you look back and you look at your history, the things that have happened that have gotten you where you are, and then now look at your current circumstances, the season that you're in. But in light of your future hopes and dreams, what would the wise thing be to do here? And it's such a great question. It is the best question ever. So in light of my past history and experience, what have I learned? And here's where I'm at today with my kids. And the house isn't picked up. But what's more important at this season? To spend time with those kids, to talk to your kids, to be engaged with your kids, to do that. Because one day when you look, and so in light of your future hopes and dreams, what is it you want your kid, what will they say?
Mm-hmm.
And what will you say? So I can look back and go, God, I've got regrets over when I was a workaholic on these things. You don't get mulligans in life. You don't get a do-over. But what you can do is you can take what you learned from that season and what you traded off and be wise. And when you look and say, well, what would the wise thing be to do here? In light of my future hopes and dreams for my family, for my, talk about legacy,
Mm-hmm.
what would they say is, what is the wise thing to do? And what am I willing to trade off to get the result that I want?
Right.
And you have to make those choices every day. Every day you're hit with choices. And you have to make that decision.
Right.
And so if you're mindful, again, where you put your focus and attention, if you're mindful that you're going to have those things come to you during the day, you have to remember, what is it that are my future hopes and dreams for my children, for my marriage, for my business, for my friends, for my community, wherever your heart and passions are, and how do you balance, speaking of balancing
Mm-hmm.
things. But I still haven't got it figured out, but I'm a lot wiser, and I give God the credit. I'm not proud about it. Pride's a killer. But I look at it and go, wow, what he's taught me through life. And that's why I love being a C12 chairs, because I was working with people and being able to not share, just be able to share from experiences. I can tell you what not to do. Or, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?
Right. Well, I also, if I had to assume too, you're helping other people almost in a mentorship role, but then it also helps you too.
Oh,
like especially in the world of recovery, it's like when you're helping people, yeah, sure, you may be helping people, but it's almost kind of selfish helping people because it's helping you too.
yes.
When you're pouring into others. So that's what I think about there.
Well, you said, what would they say about you? There's this poem by, and I'm not getting her last name, Linda. It's called The Dash. Have you ever read it?
I haven't.
I'll have to maybe share it with you. But anyway, there's a book called The Dash, but it's basically saying, what would they say about you? And they say, so you were born, Mike, 9/11/1959. And I'm not sure what date you were born on.
November 29th,
Okay. Of?
1986.
Okay. So that is a date. And one day we'll leave this earth. We'll leave.
I know where you're
and
going.
what's in the middle there is
That's
a dash.
that dash, yeah.
And it's what you do with your dash that matters. That really beginning date is a date, James says our life is but a mist or a vapor. It goes by so
Yep.
quick. A lot of people go, my daughter sometimes with young kids has said, Dad, the days are long, but the years fly by.
Yep.
Right?
I think it's Abraham Lincoln who said, I'm pretty sure it's Lincoln, I might be misquoting, but only thing people will really remember is not how you live, but how you died.
Mm.
And I've thought about that a lot too, like how you died or what you die for.
Mm.
And obviously Jesus is the classic example
Correct.
of that. We talk about how he was born, we talk about that, but it's really how he died.
Yes.
And, and I think also death, especially in our culture, I've become kind of obsessed with it, not in a dark way, but
Yeah.
I've become obsessed with it because our culture has a really fantastic way of ignoring death.
Mm.
We don't see dead people. When we go to funerals, we dress them to make them look like they're alive. We put them fully clothed,
Mm.
and yet, but we don't see them in between. People rarely die at home. It's usually in a hospital, and then even then they put them on this cart you can't see, and they'll wheel them right down the hallway, and there could be dead people wheeling right past you, but you don't know because we cover them. And so I think in our society we're very comfortable, and we have a way of ignoring death. And I think in other cultures where third world cultures where death is very, very much closer, people are often dying at home and their sickness can strike like that, I think they might live differently because they know it's coming. It's the only thing I think that we all have in common is death.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going to die.
Yes.
And I just think I'm very guilty of living my life many times ignoring that obvious fact. And so anyways, that's where I felt that the dash is awesome, but it's also, it's like, because there is going to be a number on that right side.
Correct.
And it's just a constant countdown. I feel like, I know I'm getting on a tangent here, but
No, it's good.
I feel like we've all had a countdown on the top of our head that just said, for me, 781 days. And if I knew that was how many days I had left here, I bet you I'd do things differently. If, tomorrow I wake up and it's 780, I bet you I'd do things differently. If I just truly knew like this is one less day, and I would do things differently and build a different legacy, not for myself, but for those who I'm pouring out into. So I don't know. That's a lot there, but
No, it's good because it made me think about this. I talk about my quiet times. One time I was reading Psalms 90, and Moses wrote this. Not David. Actually, there's different writers in Psalms, but Moses wrote this, and it says, the scripture says, "Teach me to number my days, O Lord, that I might gain a heart of wisdom."
yeah.
So I'll never forget. I'm in my quiet time, and I'm not this guy that's going to rush from chapter to chapter like the plank.
Yep.
I got stuck on it, and I was patient, and God revealed to me, for me, what that meant, right?
Yep.
So I'm on, teach me to number my days. And I'm going, well, I don't know how many days you're going to give me, Lord. I don't know how many I'm going to get. Nobody knows how many they're going to get. Teach me to number my days, that I might gain a heart of wisdom. So I camped on that, and I'm saying, like, I'd come back to my quiet time and go back to that. Come back the next day to my quiet time and go back to that. And then one day, I was sitting there, teach me to number my days. And I said, okay. And it was like, he said, Mike, I don't want you to count them. I want you to make them count.
Wow.
He says, if every day you can get to the end of the day and say, I counted that one, because I was either able to bless someone, be a good husband, father, business leader. Again, this other, how do I, he told Abraham, you're going to be a blessing. And because of that, you'll be blessed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, how do we number our days that we gain a heart of wisdom? And we do it by making each day count. So you go, yeah, I'm going to make each day. Well, if you don't slow down and be intentional and put your focus and attention on where you want results so that it counts, then you won't count them. You won't make them count. It's just so easy to get into the day and roll through it.
That's so good, man. It made me think so much too, because it's like a buddy of mine and I were talking a couple of days ago. So what age do you think would be good to live to? Like, what age would be a good number? And we're talking about it, and I was like, 95 would be good. 95, as long as I'm healthy and stuff. But then as you're just talking, I'm thinking, would I rather be 60 and go, but have a relationship with all my children, done all that I could, saw they were in a good place, and just one day I just don't wake up? Or would I rather be 95, have an estranged relationship with all my children, but I've lived here longer? You know what I mean? And maybe not. What would you rather have? And so it's like, am I counting the days to try to achieve the most days I can here in this world? Or am I, to your point, am I trying to make each day count?
Yes.
And I may have less of them, but what if I make them count more?
Yeah. So teach me to number my days. And how do you do that? You make that one counted today. This counted.
Yeah. I will say, and just in closing, I could sit here and talk to you for hours. You've made my day count today. I genuinely mean that. Like, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. You have an amazing ability to remember people's names. And to me, that just means that everyone's left a big impact on you, and you're leaving another big impact on other people, where just the uncanny ability just to say first and last names to me means you're just very intentional about who you interact with and learning things and having a natural curiosity, I think, that you have. And to me, I genuinely mean this. The day is young, but it's definitely counted for me.
I appreciate that, man. And
I would love so I don't know if you want to say anything in closing, but I'm just blessed to be able to sit here and talk and share a table with you.
Well, it's mutual. The fact that I got to meet you today and spend the time, and I know I did probably more talking than listening. So
that's the goal.
I'd love to. Maybe it doesn't have to be on a podcast, but we could get back together, and I'd love to hear more from you. Okay?
Sure.
I love that. I love people's stories.
Me too.
Everybody, every person has a story, and it matters to God. So it ought to matter to us, right? Each person's story, and we can learn from each other, which is super important. So what will they say? I think if, because everybody leaves, I would hope that in my dash, as I've matured and my relationship with the Lord has gotten closer and closer, that it would line up with the two great commandments. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if you can love God well and love people well, I think you've made it count.
Make it count.
Make it count.
Well, man, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll talk again soon.